These stories have a family history. They were first told by my grandmother to my mother when she was a little girl. Later, my mother told them to me, as I was to tell them to my daughter. I hope that someday she will tell them to her children. When my brothers and I grew old enough to want to read the Bible stories for ourselves, my mother searched through the bookstores for a Bible storybook which would be both faithful to the inspired Word of God and successful in conveying the dramatic excitement and human warmth of these most wonderful of all stories. When she finally despaired of ever finding such a book, she sat down with simple determination to write one. It was a labor of many years. It was still being written when I was sent off to Calvin College in Grand Rapids, where my father had been a professor of theology, and where the roots of our family lay. When I came home to Princeton for vacations, I would find my mother still busy with her Bible storybook. Day after day she carried her Bible, her pencil, and her notebook to the upstairs porch, where she could have a measure of privacy from the busy confusion of family life. With the unreflecting carelessness of youth, I accepted this as just one of the things my mother did. Like her gardening and her visiting the aged and the sick, it lay outside my own circle of interests. It was not until I myself had written many Bible stories for Sunday school papers that I fully realized the monumental task my mother had assigned herself. The National Union of Christian Schools and the William B. Erdman's Publishing Company undertook the publication of her manuscript as a joint venture of faith. The book appeared first in 3 volumes. My mother did not live to see it in its later 1-volume form. This new edition has been revised to conform more closely to our modern idiom and to incorporate the many archaeological discoveries of the past 30 years, which have corroborated and confirmed the biblical account. Although the book has been shortened somewhat, mainly by the elimination of some repetition, in order to make the volume more easy to handle, every effort has been made to preserve my mother's style, and especially to remain absolutely faithful to the Bible as the inspired and infallible Word of God. Dates and the spelling of names and places are based on the New Bible Dictionary, edited by J.D. Douglas. The Bible text, where it is directly quoted, is the King James Version. It would be impossible to say in how many ways my husband has helped me in this task, which has been a family undertaking for over a year. He and I together join in the hope that this book may make some small contribution to the nurture of God's children. And these words, which I command thee this day, shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 7. Mary Ann Catherine Voss Radius. Part 2. Wandering. Chapter 32. Moses. Exodus 1, 2. The Israelite slaves. The children of Israel were now settled in the land of Egypt. They lived there for many, many years. Joseph and all his brothers died. Another generation grew up and died, and another. The king who knew Joseph died, and he was followed by another Pharaoh, and he by another. For the Egyptians called all their kings Pharaoh. God gave many children to the Israelites, so that, as the years passed by, they became a mighty nation. After 400 years in the land of Egypt, there were about 2 million of the children of Israel. They had almost forgotten that they had ever lived in another land. They had almost forgotten about Joseph, and how he had saved the land of Egypt from starvation at the time of the terrible famine, when the Israelites had first come to Egypt. It was not strange that they had almost forgotten these things, for that time was almost as far away from them as the time of Columbus is from us. But they had not entirely forgotten. Mothers still told their children bedtime stories of the boy Joseph who was sold into slavery by his cruel brothers, and of his wonderful rise to power, till he was next in power to Pharaoh himself. The fathers still told their sons about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and how God had often spoken to them, how he had promised to give them the land of Canaan, and how they had trusted in God's promise. As one Pharaoh after another reigned, The Egyptians also forgot who Joseph was and what he had done for the people of Egypt in the time of the terrible famine. There came to the throne a Pharaoh who knew nothing about Joseph. This new king saw the mighty nation of the Israelites living in the land of Egypt, right among the Egyptians. He said to his people, "Behold, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we are. If there should be a war, they might join with our enemies and fight against us. We must do something to prevent this." Pharaoh made the children of Israel work hard. He was building 2 treasure cities called Pithom and Ramesses, and he made the Israelites work hard on these cities as slaves. He set taskmasters over the Israelites with long whips in their hands. If they saw a man who was not working hard enough, they brought the cruel whip down on his back. But the more cruelly the Egyptians treated them, the more the Israelites multiplied and grew. This was because of God's promise to Abraham that his children's children should be as many as the sands on the seashore and as the stars in the sky. God was blessing the Israelites even in their great trouble. When Pharaoh saw this, he thought of a still more cruel way to prevent the Israelites from becoming stronger. He commanded that whenever a little boy was born in any Israelite home, the baby must be thrown into the river. The little girls might live because they could not grow up to be soldiers who would fight against the Egyptians. A strange cradle. Now in those evil days, a beautiful baby boy was born to a father and mother among the Israelites. He was a fine baby, strong and well. His mother made up her mind to hide him so that the Egyptian soldiers would not come and throw him into the Nile River. She did not tell anybody that she had a new baby. She hid him where none of the neighbors would see him. The minute he began to cry, she hushed him up very quickly. But when he was 3 months old, she could not hide him any longer, for he cried so loudly that people could hear him even when they were outside the house. So she wove a little boat of reeds, which she covered on the outside with tar to stop up the cracks and to keep the water out. She lined it with a soft cloth and put the baby in it. She carried the basket boat down to the riverside and laid it gently in the bulrushes that grew near the river bank. Then she went home, for she did not dare to stay there. She was afraid that someone would see her and suspect that she had a baby hidden there. The baby had a sister, Miriam, who was about 12 years old. Miriam stood at a little distance to watch what would happen to the baby. That very day, Pharaoh's daughter went down to the river to bathe. She saw the little basket among the bulrushes. She had one of her maids bring it to her. When she opened it, she saw the beautiful baby, who began to cry. She felt sorry for the baby, for, she said, this is one of the Hebrew children. All her maids clustered around and looked at the baby. When he began to cry, they lifted him out of the basket and tried to soothe him. The princess took him in her arms. The baby soon stopped crying and smiled up into her face. When she saw that, she loved him and determined to adopt him as her own son. All this time Miriam had been watching from the bulrushes. When she saw the princess take the baby in her arms, she ran out and asked the princess, "Shall I go and call one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," answered the princess. Little Miriam ran home very quickly and called her mother. Her mother hurried to the princess, who said to her, "I found this child in the bulrushes, and I am going to adopt him. Will you take him home and take care of him for me? I will pay you for it." So the mother carried home her own baby and took care of him for Pharaoh's daughter. The princess had some silk and linen clothes made for him, such as kings' sons wear. Every week his mother took him to Pharaoh's palace so that the princess could see him. The princess gave him beautiful gold and silver toys and everything that a little prince might like to have. Although he was often taken to the palace, he lived with his mother till he was about 4 years old. He played with his brother Aaron, who was 3 years older than he was, and with Miriam. His mother carefully taught him about the true God, for the Egyptians worshipped idols. She told him about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. "You must remember," she said, "that though Pharaoh's daughter has adopted you as her son, you are really an Israelite, not an Egyptian." She taught him about God very carefully, weighing every word, for she knew that she would never have another chance to tell him these important things. At last he went to live with the princess in the palace. She hired the finest teachers in the land to teach him all the wisdom and learning of the Egyptians. Since he was a prince, he must be a wise man. The princess named him Moses, which means drawn out. For, she said, I drew him out of the water. It was a very good thing that Moses was taught all the learning of the Egyptians. God had a great work for Moses to do. God was already planning Moses' life. A flight into the desert. One day, when Moses was 40 years old, he went out to the place where the Egyptians were working. There he saw an Egyptian cruelly beat an Israelite slave. Moses was angry. He looked this way and that. He did not see anyone near. He raised his arm and killed the Egyptian. He hid his body in the sand. The next day he went out again to the place where the Hebrews were working. 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other, and one of them was beating the other. Moses said to the man who was beating the other, "Why do you hurt him?" The man answered roughly, "Who made you a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed that Egyptian?" Moses was very much frightened. He thought nobody had seen him kill the Egyptian. When Pharaoh heard what he had done, he wanted to kill Moses. Moses ran for his life, far away into the desert. At last he came to the land of Midian, which was so far away from Egypt that he knew Pharaoh could not find him. This was a hot, dry country. Moses sat down by a well to rest. Now in that country there lived a man named Jethro. He had 7 daughters. They watched the sheep in the fields, for Jethro had large flocks. These young girls brought their sheep to the well and let down their pitchers to draw up water for the sheep. They poured the water into a trough so that the sheep could drink. But some rough country fellows came around, who were also shepherds. They pushed the girls rudely away and began to water their own sheep. When Moses saw this, he helped the girls draw water for their sheep. When the girls came home, their father said to them, "How is it that you have come home so early today?" They answered, "There was a very kind man by the well, an Egyptian. He drove away the rough shepherds, and he helped us water our sheep." Their father Jethro said to them, "Why did you not bring him home with you if he was so kind? Go back and invite him for supper." So the girls went back to the well and invited Moses to come and eat supper with them. Moses came, and he liked the family so much that he stayed with them. After a while, he married one of the girls. By and by, he had a little son whom he named Gershom, which means a stranger here. Soon after that, he had another little son. He named him Eliezer, which means God is a help. For, he said, God has helped me when Pharaoh wanted to kill me. Moses now kept the sheep for Jethro, his father-in-law.